Hey, deserving listeners, 90-Day Fiancé. Tell all, no limits, zero, just absolutely no limits this time. Let's watch.
I don't feel held back, so
I'm very happy for that. Libby, you just got to understand that, like, he's turning you against your family. He's turning you against me, turning you against Jen, trying to turn you against my mom. Like, you got to understand, like...
Okay, I've been so happy to have a family system to apply concepts to that I don't usually get a chance to talk about. One of the ways of looking at this, and there's no way to know, there'd be no way to scientifically demonstrate this or measure it or test it, but a model of understanding family systems is thus, that when Libby, and I've talked about this before, but we're seeing a specific example of it. Basically, systems want stability. Family systems want stability. Your physical, biological system wants stability. The environment, the climate, the ecological system tends to gravitate and prefer stability, if you will. You know, an ecology doesn't have a mind, but there tend to be in working systems that manage to sustain themselves over time. There tends to be a stability to it with occasional shifts in stability and change when necessary. So a well-working system will manage what we call homeostasis, which is stability, and yet, when needed, they will shift that homeostasis to something else, because if a system just remains the same all the time, it can't adapt. There are ecological systems, agricultural systems. It's nice to have stability so that things can be predictable and you know how to keep things going. But when the climate is changing, how does it adjust? It needs to adjust rather quickly to the climate, and our temperatures might be rising too fast for the system to be able to adjust. In the past, temperatures would go up and down, but it would do so at a very slow pace such that the system is given enough time to adjust to a new homeostasis. So in family systems, they also tend to want to gravitate towards stability because we and systems like predictability. We like things to be predictable. When things are chaotic and we have no idea one moment to the next, we don't know how to manage our expectations and also manage our needs. For example, in a family system, if you can always rely on Libby to be the stable one and the one that will listen to you and the one that you can kind of poke fun at and she won't poke fun back, then you know you can predict that. And when needed, people will go to her for support or make fun of her, and they know what generally she's going to do and what the rest of the family will do. Families want that homeostasis. They want that stability. And when we analyze moment to moment within these family systems, the way in which the system manages homeostasis and stability is through what we call negative feedback, meaning that there are a lot of different mechanisms in place, behaviorally wise, within and without, that will act to keep the family stable and the same. Now, in a well-functioning family, this is great. You know, it's a good thing that you have negative feedback. Don't associate negative with bad. Negative just means returning to baseline. For example, a thermostat, when you set your thermostat to 70 degrees Fahrenheit and it gets too hot, there's negative feedback to turn on the AC to bring it down to 70 or to turn off the heat or something. And when it gets too cold, there's negative feedback to bring it back to 70 in the form of heat. So that's negative feedback. Positive feedback isn't good feedback. All positive means is that it exacerbates change. So, for example, in our ecological system, in our planetary system, Earth, when you have warming of the atmosphere, you have melting of the ice caps of the glaciers, such that the ice caps have a high albedo, I think they call it, in that it reflects a lot of the light because it's white ice, white snow, right? So the sunlight comes in to the Earth and gets reflected back, and it also takes not only the photon but the heat energy, right? And so as you heat up the atmosphere, the ice caps melt naturally more than they would normally, which actually means that the Earth is now absorbing more of the heat because there's less of that reflection happening from the ice caps. This is what we call a positive feedback loop, because as you put energy in, as you start to change things from stability, from whatever the average temperature was before, and you start to push it hotter, it causes something to happen that actually exacerbates the problem. So as the Earth is getting hotter, the ice caps melt, which causes a runaway effect. And so in family systems, this negative feedback versus positive feedback isn't good or bad. It's just an element of systems that you can observe. So with this family, in a very reductive, rudimentary sense, we could analyze a couple things that we're seeing. One is that with the family, when Andrei came into the family, it pushed not only the family the family had to adapt. It was something that was happening new to the family. Roles had to be renegotiated. They had to include Andrei into the situation. They had to experience a less receptive Libby, I think. I don't know, but I think what happened was normally Libby just let things go in the family and didn't say anything. But now not only is Libby less available because she's with her husband and her kid a lot, but I think she also is starting to distance herself or stand up for herself or has someone to defend her, that kind of thing. So that's a change to the system. And if the system has healthy mechanisms to be able to adjust to a new homeostasis, maybe even a better homeostasis, like one of the things that could have happened in terms of positive feedback, remember positive doesn't mean good or bad, it just means change, is that they could have realized, I seem to be really upset about Libby's distance, but why is that? Why am I scapegoating Andrei? Maybe it's because we've been, putting too much on Libby and we haven't really been listening to her that much. And maybe she puts up with a lot of our stuff. And maybe there's other issues in our family. So the introduction of Andrei creates a positive feedback loop that leads to a new homeostasis that's more functional, in which everyone can get their needs met and there's more flexibility and less harm going back and forth between the people. There's another positive feedback loop that we might also be seeing in which Andrei comes into the family, same thing happens with Libby, and they start to scapegoat Andrei, and now Charlie's drinking might increase, or at least it becomes more noticeable because of all the chaos, and the family now is quite different than it was before Andrei entered the family. They've reached a different state, a different homeostasis now. Positive feedback loops happened to get them there, but it ended up either being a lateral move in terms of functioning and health, or even a negative move, a downward trend in terms of the positive feedback. Yeah, okay. So another thing to observe is negative feedback in how families manage to corral the family back to homeostasis. So, for example, a healthy negative feedback mechanism is you have a family member that is going through a lot of stress and is in a bad mood. And a negative feedback loop, again, negative doesn't mean bad, it just means it's bringing back to homeostasis. So you have someone that's experienced a lot of stress from the outside, it's starting to stress out the family, and the family is starting to sway from its normal stability. And a negative feedback mechanism could be that someone could actually just say, hey, mom's really stressed out about work. Everyone take it easy on her. Let's give her some slack, or let's do the chores for her or something. So that's a change, right? Normally, you don't do that for her in to that degree, and you don't do her chores for her. So you're doing something different, but you're trying to bring the family back to homeostasis because things are starting to feel off kilter. So along those lines, with this family, when we see Charlie, the family system was, if I was looking at it through this lens, Libby communicates a lot of things that are pushing the family away from its normal homeostasis. One, she's saying, look, if push comes to shove, I choose my husband and my child. And yeah, if that means I don't hang out with my family, then that's what it means. And Libby is also not engaging in the fight. She's just saying, my family's always had problems, and they've just been made more visible by this reality TV show and by the fact that Andrei is now here. And so the way Libby's talking, it's almost like it's done. The separation has occurred. And Libby is saying, my life's better over here. So if Libby said something like, my life sucks over here, then there would be no need for a negative feedback mechanism to pull her back in, right? But that's not so. So she's moving away, and the system is now changing. And I don't know all the ins and outs of every family member, but it's possible that she played a very important role in the emotional dynamics and the needs of the family. And with her separating now and verbally saying that, because this could be the first time she's ever said that directly to them, that not only have I been actively separating myself, but things are a lot better for me over here. You hear it in her voice. And then Charlie, you could interpret his behavior as a way of trying to establish a negative feedback mechanism to pull her back in. And the go-to mechanism that they have in their back pocket at the ready all the time is scapegoat Andrei, scapegoat Andrei, scapegoat Andrei, because they believe, I think, that Libby will be on their side, that Libby will either come to them to convince, and it probably worked in the beginning because they probably have been scapegoating him from the beginning, or at least an early point. And in the beginning, I bet you Libby would actually go to the family and say, no, or you know what, I kind of agree. And in fact, I remember that in the first season, Libby would kind of agree with her family because Andrei was being a jerkface a lot. So Libby would go to the family and the family would say, okay, good. We scapegoated Andrei. It exposed their issues. Libby came to us and now everything is good. Everything's stable and everything feels good. But they kept at it. They kept at it. They kept at it. Libby and Andrei, their relationship seemingly got better after the beginning months. And the mechanism, the negative feedback mechanism, was not working. But systems, again, because of homeostasis and they want things to remain the same, their mechanisms, it's particularly if they lack health, if they lack differentiation, their mechanisms will tend to be very routinized and very patterned and very habitual. They will have very low ability to be flexible or to think outside the box, to consider the big picture. They'll just keep hammering on something. If you ever see a family that just keeps doing the same thing over and over again, even though it shoots them in the foot, it's because of this reason. There's a lot of different things I could say as to why that is, but for time's sake, I'll just move forward. That we could interpret what Charlie did right there was this very patterned, routinized, habitual response. Scapegoat Andrei, and we're going to get back at. So let's watch again through this lens. When Libby says this in a very calm, convincing way, that she's kind of done with the family, at least for now, and she's happier than Charlie's response.
Libby, I just want to know if you have just any parting remarks for your sister and your brother.
No, I don't really have anything to say.
You have nothing to say?
A lot happier now that I've distanced myself from my family. I have a lot more peace. I don't have as much anxiety as I used to. I'm doing a lot more of my singing, and I don't feel held back. So
a healthier family, that would hurt any family, just to hear that. Like, wow, our sister is happier without us. That'll hurt. Whether or not it's justified or not, they probably don't feel like it's justified. But anyway, so there's going to be an incursion there, just like, ooh, okay, a healthy family would be able to differentiate and say, well, that hurts, and maybe it feels unfair, but I don't want my sister to not be happy, so I guess it's a good thing that we're all losing her to some extent, which is bad, but she's happy, which is good. So how do we, maybe I need to look at myself, maybe we need to have a conversation. Hey, Libby, what can I do so that by coming back to the family would make you not feel like it was better over there without us? Like, what can we do to repair that? Or what did I do to cause this problem? That would be a healthy response, right? That would be a negative feedback mechanism as a way of pulling her back in, but it would be healthy and differentiated and would actually, but if you had that mechanism, that healthy mechanism, then the homeostasis would look very different. This homeostasis, at least we've seen on the show, has never looked like that. So to have a completely new habitual response to something like that would be very odd. Now, that happens sometimes, but especially with rigid, undifferentiated, particularly unhealthy families, you will see the same thing over and over and over again. And as a family therapist, that can get very frustrating. But you get used to it and you learn to just take your time, and things take time. People come to therapy because they have problems, and some of those problems take a long time to change. So, and it goes back, sometimes generations have the very, very similar mechanisms within their family that have been passed down. So we see her saying that she's not only separated, but she's happy about it. That's a huge shift to the family system. Very disorienting, very scary to a family system. In the healthy side of things, like in my family, for example, most of my family lives in the Seattle area. So if one of my siblings were to say that they were considering moving to another country, that would be threatening. That would make us very sad. So, and that's healthy, right? That's healthy to worry. It's healthy for them too. It's healthy for them to feel worried and sad about the loss of their sister and the loss of that relationship. Okay, so it's not necessarily healthy or unhealthy about the generating feeling that motivates the feedback mechanism. So, but the mechanism itself will indicate how healthy or unhealthy it is. So then Charlie says this.
I'm very happy for you. Libby, you just got to understand that, like, he's turning you against your family. He's turning you against me, turning you against Jen, trying to turn you against my mom. Like, you got to understand, like, what the root problem is.
And there are probably other things that they're trying to solve through this negative feedback mechanism that it did work in the past. That's always the thing to know, is that these very weird, routinized behavioral or habitual unhealthy patterns were built during a time when it absolutely was seemingly the only option that would either work some of the time at least, if not all the time. So this scapegoating must have worked in the past such that they just keep going to it over and over again, seemingly. So my point is that there are other goals, potentially subconsciously or consciously, that this mechanism is trying to achieve. Not just trying to pull Libby back in and to get rid of Andrei, but also to potentially justify to the system that the system needs some sense of self-esteem. Because Libby right now, I think Libby might be kind of the favorite in the family. Chuck certainly kind of treats Libby in that way. And I think they've even said as much, and the siblings, I think, might resent Libby for that and might have been mildly bullying her in her life because of that perception, or because that's true, I don't know. And then that could have caused Chuck to actually give more favoritism to Libby because he felt bad for her. Who knows? I'm just speculating. But one of the incursions is it's not only losing Libby, but it's also this message from someone from the inside that they've claimed that they respect. They don't respect Andrei, but they respect Libby. They love Libby. They want Libby to be a bar. For an insider of the family to say, you people are unhealthy, she's not saying that in those words, but you could see these individuals interpreting it that way. And you people are worse than my husband, and you people are not healthy for me. You make people unhappy. That is a threat to that system. It's a threat to their self-esteem. They have to start to look at themselves. They might even have to look at their own drinking or various other mechanisms in the family. And Becky's look in terms of this face right now, I don't know if I'm just reading into it, but I suspect that she has a lot more insight into the family than she lets on, or even that is presented on the show. Charlie doesn't really exhibit it, but he could too. But Becky I've seen little things from Becky that seem to indicate that she doesn't want to be disloyal to the family, but if you really were to get an honest answer from her, she would say all the things that she said that is problematic, but she would also potentially say a lot of things like, yeah, my family, let me tell you, there's all sorts of problems in my family that have nothing to do with Andrei. I imagine she would say something like that when she was differentiated. But anyway, so when Charlie scapegoats Andrei, another goal might not necessarily be to get Libby back, because that might be perceived as a done deal, but as a way of preserving their self-esteem of just like, well, we all understand that Libby rejecting us isn't because we're bad people, and it's not really Libby rejecting. It's because Andrei is a master manipulator, and so we can just blame that and move on with our lives, and we don't have to question our family. We don't have to look at our issues. We don't have to change. I don't have to change my drinking pattern. I don't have to question anything. We can just move on with our life. So that might be another reason why he's doing this in this moment.
Turning you against your family. He's turning you against me, turning you against Jen, trying to turn you against my mom. Like, you got to understand, like, what the root problem is. It's not all of us. You know?
It's always been the problem. So if everyone has always had their issues.
So if you don't want to see your family, that's on you.
But I just want you.
Yeah, it's almost tragically comical how habitual and repetitive the scapegoating of Andrei is. The same phrases. And you know that the family behind closed doors are using those phrases with each other against Andrei. It's like a political party with their party lines. The same. Let's rewind. When you hear the phrases that he's using, it's just like we've heard these phrases thousands of times, and they really, in terms of what we've seen on the show, there's no indication that any of this is accurate, that somehow Andrei is this master manipulator. In fact, if I remember right, and it wasn't that long ago that I watched it, the first couple seasons, Andrei was really trying to ingratiate himself in the family because he was trying to get a job with Chuck, and he was trying to be, at least liked by Libby's siblings. And they were the ones that came in hot. I remember that one time when they went to that one house, and Andrei is this eager new employee of just like, okay, we're going to flip this house. And of course, that was the scene where Andrei like beats this refrigerator to death, even though all he had to do was use a wrench and take off a screw, and you just take the door off. But anyway, so he is really trying in that moment. And then Becky and Charlie came in and just started attacking Andrei and Chuck. I mean, I might be misremembering that, but it was something like that. So I think Andrei in the beginning was, maybe secretly or behind closed door or off camera, he was being mean to the family, but he was really, he was at least trying to some extent, maybe a little bit of a bull in a china shop or something, but not the way that they're painting him. Certainly not the way he is now. The way he is now is he's just like, you people have been attacking me for a long time, and I'm done with you. I think, and I don't really blame him. I think he shouldn't take the bait. He doesn't seem to be doing it right now. He seems to be just listening. He could do so much better for him and Libby if he just didn't respond to the attacks.
Libby, you just got to understand that, he's turning you against your family. He's turning you against me, turning you against Jen, try to turn you against my mom. You got to understand.
Just imagine Libby, before Andrei comes around, the way she's being talked to right now, that her older siblings are saying, yeah, okay, little sister, we've all agreed. We know you're being manipulated by someone. I know you keep saying you're not being manipulated, but you are. We've made that choice for you. Just imagine your siblings saying that to you. And you keep saying, no, I'm not. I'm not being manipulated. It has nothing to do with that. I'm a strong person. I can stand up for what are you talking about? I'm distancing myself from you because of the way you treat me and my family. And it predates Andrei. I don't even want to get into it. So that's extremely insulting. She doesn't even say that, though. So one, it illuminates potentially a lifelong pattern of the way they've been treating her and treating other people as well. But another notable thing here is that Libby is just quietly taking it, and she's done that for a long time. Sometimes it's harder to see healthy behavior on the show because it's less noticeable. But Libby, and I've been talking about it in terms of her relation, you could argue that her ability to put up with Andrei's aggressive flare-ups is because she had a lifetime of practicing that with Charlie, with her mom. I suspect her mom is more like Charlie because Chuck, in the beginning, it seemed like Chuck and Charlie were hand in hand, but it looks more like Chuck is more like Libby, and Charlie and Becky and Jen are more like the mom. I obviously don't know that. There's no real data for that, but I suspect that Libby a long time ago learned how to manage the situation by just nodding her head or being nice or just not getting pulled into the situation. So it is notable.
And that, he's turning you against your family. He's turning you against me, turning you against Jen, try to turn you against my mom. You got to understand, what the root problem is. It's not all of us,
It's always been the problem.
So if
everyone has always had their issues.
So if you don't want to see your family, that's on you.
But I just want you both to know.
And sorry for interrupting Becky in that moment. I don't know why I'm apologizing because I often am quote unquote interrupting, but we can use this as a jumping off point in that for a lot of you, I know, you struggle with your family of origin being, shall we say, toxic in your life and re-traumatizing you and having a lot of chaos. And although, of course, you want to connect with them and there is some good elements to the relationship with your family of origin, you have a lot of conflicts with them, and there are times when you think about cutting yourself off from them. And I don't know the right thing to do, of course. There's a lot of different possibilities and options, and it's up to you to make that choice. But we can use this situation as maybe a template for us to think about our own lives. That to see Libby try, in her calm way, seemingly, on the show, to try to work it out and to have it not work and to have the family just keep, because one of the things that I will hear from a lot of people as they're trying to get their family of origin, their parents, their siblings that they grew up with, to understand them, validate them. They're just like, my parents, I keep trying to get them to understand what they did, or I keep trying to get my siblings to understand that I'm not crazy or something. There will often be this feedback loop, if you will, and this pattern and this stuckness, this rigidity that will keep the person in question wrapped up in the family chaos. And because they're like, well, I kind of want to leave my family of origin, but I can't really leave until they understand why I'm leaving. Because if I just leave, then they're going to conclude that I'm the jerk face, but I'm not the jerk face. I need them to understand why I'm leaving. And so I'm going to keep trying to convince them why I'm leaving. And I'm not going to leave until they're convinced. And so sometimes, again, there's no way for me to know case by case. And I never obviously encourage people to leave their family. If anything, I try to, at least at first, try to offer options and perspectives and behavioral changes to that individual such that things might change. And a lot of times there is success to that. But if the client wants to separate at any point in the process, then of course I support that as well. It's just a personal choice that a client will make. But if you are in that conundrum where you're stuck between a rock and a hard place and a good part of you wants to leave your family, but you feel like you can't until you convince them or you get them to be okay with it or something like that. Or even you don't want to leave until their chaos calms down because you might worry about your other sibling who is still in the midst of your parents' web, if you will. Or you have a parent that's suffering from medical problems or something. You feel guilty. You feel ashamed of yourself. You feel like a bad child if you separate under those circumstances. Well, again, it's individual in terms of a decision, but we can look at this situation from outside. We're not wrapped up in it. And look at Libby, at least from my personal, as a citizen point of view, and say that Libby has every right, even though the family is convinced otherwise that it's all Andrei's fault and they don't take any personal responsibility, seemingly, that even though Libby leaving, she knows they're gonna continue to blame Andrei and they're gonna think that I'm stupid, that I'm manipulatable. But life is short, and I'd rather have my family understand. Well, I'd rather have my family be validating and change their ways, but that seemingly is going to happen. And if I'm going to leave, I'd rather have them understand why I'm leaving and validate that. If that's not going to happen, I'd rather just leave and have them think whatever they're going to think. And so if you're going through that, you can use this as an example of sort of a surrogate differentiation. You might have a hard time differentiating from your family to look down at your situation in an objective way at times to be able to gauge what's best for you and everyone because you're so wrapped up in it, you're so fused with the situation. Well, y'all are differentiated from this situation because you're not in it, presumably, unless you are one of the cast members, in which case this doesn't apply to you because you're wrapped up in it. But if you're not a cast member, then you can watch this from afar and be more quote unquote objective about it. We don't know what's really happening, of course, but in terms of what's being presented, and say one way or the other, like, should she stay? Should she go? What should her attitude be? And then you can apply it to yourself of like, well, that is a question that I'll often ask clients is like, they'll be in this conundrum. They don't know what to do. And obviously I don't tell them what to do unless it's a very particular kind of situation. But one of the questions I'll ask clients is, well, particularly if my client is a therapist themselves, I will say, well, what would you, if you had a client that came to you with this issue, or you had a friend that came to you with this issue, what would you tell them? Often their response is a much more differentiated response, much more healthy of a response. It doesn't mean you have to do that thing, but it just means you want to add that to the equation. I would speculate that for Libby, at the time of this tell-all, she is at a point now where she's like, well, this is just my guess in terms of her attitude. She probably is thinking, I want a better relationship with my family. And of course, I'm still going to see my family. I'm not going to completely cut myself off from them. But I now realize I can't really hang out with them very much. They've really hurt my feelings. I feel a lot better now that I'm not hanging out with them very often. Obviously, my marriage is going better. When we're not around my family, me and my husband and my child, we don't have any chaos really. We have occasional little issues, but everything's fine. So why would I want to mess that up? It's a tragedy. I have to be away from my family more, but I'm going to hang out with my family, but I'm not going to hang out with them as often. And I'm going to slowly change the situation such that I see them. You know, if it were up to Andrei, we'd never see my family, but I want to see my family at all the major events, you know, my nieces and nephews' birthdays. I want to go to that. And I didn't show the clips, but Andrei even said a few phrases that indicate maybe they've had that conversation, because Andrei was saying that, fine, you know, I can go to a party and I could stand across the room and act nice. So I wonder if Libby's like, look, here's what's going to happen. I'm not going to cut myself off, but when we do occasionally hang out with the family, I need you to just stand on the other side of the room, act nice for 3 hours, and then we'll go home, okay? So just don't create any issues. And I'm sure Andrei would be like, I'm fine with that. I can do that. What are you talking about? So I imagine that for Libby, she isn't completely out. She wants to stay in. And she also might be thinking, well, maybe I can manage to change it at some point down the line. Maybe eventually they'll just give up on this scapegoating of Andrei thing, and I'll be able to re-engage with everyone again the way that I want to. They'll focus on someone else. They'll focus on Charlie again the way that they used to, or my mom the way that I don't know who else was scapegoated in the family. But so I imagine that that's where she's at. I also imagine that she does feel guilty on a certain level, because a lot of people in her position would. They feel ashamed of themselves, like, I'm being a bad daughter, I'm being a bad sibling, and in my family you just don't do that kind of thing. But the fact that she says she's less anxious, wow, that says a lot. Just imagine that you separate yourself from your family of origin and you have tremendous psychological well-being. I mean, that more so. That is saying something, is it not?
No, that we can all work and live together, but this is
Me and you,
this is a possibility. Things
me and
aren't
you
just
will think about it, but the rest,
things aren't
it's a
just black and
different
white.
Yeah, you think, Becky? I mean, if the show is any representation of reality, you should be looking in the mirror on that one, because the two of them, particularly Libby, has been trying to work it out in a non-black and white manner. The family, I mean, Charlie literally just said that Andrei is a problem. He's manipulating you. Everything that you are doing right now is not because you want to, but because he's manipulated you. And Becky has said as much as well, many, many times. So who's the black and white person?
if we want to live like proper, like and have a discussion, we should just like communicate more, because I'm gonna tell you like more like from the side what happens.
You have
if
to
you have your way,
understand that. You have your way of dealing with my family. I have my way of
if you
dealing
wanna,
with my family.
if we want to,
and we can be good on that.
anyways, it's like I'm glad like we actually have a, you know.
This is interesting. So they think this is a civil conversation. I guess comparatively it is. So it's interesting to hear them trying to confer. That's interesting because, you know, they were on the same page at the beginning of the season, indicating that there is some flexibility there and maybe some differentiation or some flexibility on Becky's part. And then Becky said something interesting. She's like, look, you have your way of communicating with the family and I have mine. And Andrei was also saying, we have to talk more, but I'm going to, let's rewind this.
If we want to live like proper, like and have a discussion, we should just like communicate more, because I'm going to tell you like more like from the side what happened.
So I think Andrei seemingly trusts Becky and has reason to trust her, and is saying, if we're going to improve things, we have to communicate more. I need to talk with you more. I need to tell you what's really happening so that you don't get influenced by other people and believe lies about what, because I think he might be referring to when Becky was accusing Andrei of attacking their mom, her mom, and Andrei's like, that's not what happened. I didn't just attack her. And so Andrei is saying, if we talk more, then like we can clear up a lot of things. That's interesting. One, it shows that Andrei has some trust in general, but also in particular with Becky. And then Becky's like, well, yeah, you have your way of talking. Let's hear what she says.
You have
if
to
you have your way,
understand that. You have your way of dealing with my family. I have my way of
if you
dealing
want
with my family.
I bet you anything. Well, not anything. I don't bet. So what would I bet? I'd bet $5 that Becky right now, what she's saying, in my words, is, look, my mom has issues. I've always had issues with my mom. And my mom placates for Charlie because early in the season, Becky seemingly was the main person standing on the side of at least trying to be healthy by drawing a boundary with Charlie, seemingly. If Charlie has the issue that they claim that he does, it wouldn't be unusual to conclude after years of struggling that a healthy approach is to be loving, and you're still his sibling, but you're just not going to go to events where he's going to be there because 1 out of 10 times he has an issue because of his drinking, and it's just too much stress for me and the rest of the family. So until he gets sober, and as soon as he gets sober, then yeah, absolutely, I'm right there. But until then, I'm just not going to hang out with him. So Becky seemed to be the person on that, and I think she also has a thing with the mom. So if I was to take a guess, I would say that the mom and Charlie have the most issues, at least in the past, and Becky is the main person, because it would make sense, right? She seems the most, aside from Libby, the most sensible-ish. I mean, she certainly, and she seems to have the most trauma. I mean, that fight that the two of them had over that picnic table, I mean, she just launched. It seemed like she had an absolute, just visceral, traumatic reaction in that moment. So again, I would bet $5 that what she means is, I have my way of dealing with Charlie and my mom that I think is more functional than your way, because your way is to just attack, which look what that's got us. And I'm telling you, it's not a good way to do it. I have my way. Now, I don't know if I were there, if I would know if Becky's way is any healthier, but I imagine she feels that way. And so I think that's what she's saying. Let's rewind.
Like more like from the side, what happens?
You have
if
to
you have your way,
that. You have your way of dealing with my family. I have my way of dealing with my family.
If we want to,
and we can be good on that.
And we can be good on that, meaning you can deal with it your way, and I'll deal with it my way. Who knows? I'm often wrong. Literally 3 seconds later, they could reveal what they were talking about, and I'll be like, oh, what? I was jumping to a conclusion. So there's something else going on here, because in terms of what happened in the tell-all, this conversation, I have no idea what's happening right now. What are they talking about? It sounds way more reasonable, way more trusting, way more on the same side of things. Libby's actually back home because she's pregnant. So obviously Libby can't be there, which is another interesting thing, that maybe when Andrei can't depend on Libby to bail him out, he acts more calm. Maybe they'll reveal what they're talking about here.
anyways, it's like I'm glad like we actually have I actually have a civil conversation.
I'm working on it. Like, I don't want to lose you and Libby.
We'll fix it. We'll work it out. Okay? All right.
That's great. Yeah, that's nice. It's really nice that Becky said that. I don't want to lose the two of you. She didn't say, I don't want to lose. I might cry a little bit. Becky's not saying, I don't want to lose Libby. She's saying, I don't want to lose you and Libby. I don't want to lose you. It probably took a lot to be able to say that, but that's a much more functional, helpful thing to say. And yeah, that's great. Huh. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I've been saying this for the past few episodes. I wouldn't be surprised if Becky carries a lot of the trauma of the family, is the one trying to hold everything together in her way, is the one trying to be helpful to others. I could imagine that, because, Jen doesn't seem to really fit that bill. And there's another sibling, at least one other sibling that's not even on the show, because we've seen them in pictures. I think Chuck has his role to play in this way as well. I mean, they all have that role to play, but I don't know if, in terms of what we've seen, we would say Charlie and the mom are really at the, the pinnacle of health and reasonableness, particularly Charlie, right? So yeah, I'd be so curious about what is going on in her head, all the things that she knows and all the opinions she has and all the takes that she has. I would be so curious about this because I think that this family is just as complex as all other families, but that means extremely infinitely complex, way more complex than what we're being seen on the show. And if we knew at least a little bit of that complexity, we would understand to a greater extent why this family is the way that it is on this show.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Because
And it reminds me, I haven't done a lot of family therapy in a long time. The first 10, 15 years of my career, about a third of or a half of my clients were families. And I'm reminded of the intensity and the creativity that I had to engage in, and also the amount of countertransference I would have, the amount of feelings and reactivity, because, there's 6 people in the room and everyone's triangulating me, and I have get pretty intense. And there would be times when there would be a Becky that would annoy me at first, but then if I switched it in my brain and went with the issue and decided to work with it, I would turn to the Becky in the room and I would say, like, you seem to know a lot about do you know a lot about this family? Do you have a lot of opinions? Do you feel like you know a lot of things? Like you're trying to hold things together? I'm getting that sense. When there's another part of me that is really pissed off at this individual because they've been resisting or creating all this chaos. But once I identified that and actually got on their side and got behind them, and where I could push them in direction, they had a lot of impulses, and if I could just sort of push them in the impulses that they already had that I thought would bear fruit and prevented them from having the impulses that would not, then I could go very fast to the family, because I have this insider that already is maybe the family therapist to begin with, right? That's their role. And then I can use that. And that is, like, in a lot of family therapy theory circles, that is the ideal. As a family therapist, we're not going to be there all the time. So you want the family to function on its own. And if you can utilize the roles and you can figure out the strengths that are already there and just help them to realize those strengths more often and to mitigate the weaknesses and the destruction, then you don't need that much time in therapy, right? You just do those. You're already doing these things. Do those, and don't do those things. Just increase those things and decrease those things, and things should be working well. So when I think about changing, because I did that in my mind as Becky and Andrei were talking, I felt that shift that I remember so well of just like, okay, I'm feeling a lot of, I'm at odds with this family member, but if I go with them and get behind them, it's so much, it's like when you're trying to swim upstream and then all of a sudden you realize, I could just float downstream and get there. All right, well, that is for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself and take care of others, because we all deserve it. We really, really do.